From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
With just 10 days to the GOP caucuses in Iowa, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, and Nikki Haley are now really mixing it up. Who's up? Who's down? Their strengths and weaknesses, and a look at those possible paths to victory. Welcome to Potomac Watch. I'm Kim Strassel, joined today by two essential, amazing colleagues, Kate Batchelder-Odell and Bill McGurn. And what we're going to do here is take a look at these frontrunners in turn. But first, just to set the scene, the caucuses are the Tuesday after next. And right now, the Real Clear Politics average has Trump with 51% of the vote in Iowa, DeSantis at 18.6%, and Nikki Haley just about tied with him at 16.1%. Then there's a big gap before you get to some of the single-digit pollers like Vivek Ramaswamy at 5 or Chris Christie at almost 4. And while we're going to focus on Iowa here, I think it's also important to note what's going on in New Hampshire because the follow-on race there is a big part of candidate strategy. And there, Donald Trump is at 46%, Haley at 25%, which I would note is up 10 points from just mid-November. Chris Christie at 10 and Ron DeSantis at 4th place at 9%. So, Bill, when you look at these numbers, a lot of people, including the entire media establishment, are basically saying, well, this is done before it's even begun. Donald Trump in both states has a lead of 20 or even 30 points. He's inevitable. I tend to look at it a little different in that I think it's kind of striking that even though he's essentially the incumbent, he's still at about 50%. Meaning that at least half of the state wants somebody else to be the nominee. That could be even greater number given polls are showing anywhere from 35 to 45% of the electorate still says that they are open to changing their minds before the caucus or remain undecided. But what say you, Bill? Tell me why I'm wrong. Does Trump already have this sewn up or do we still possibly have a race?
Well, I think it's always a mistake to write it off because in politics, there are always landmines, surprises. We know Trump has been strong in the polls, but we don't know how that translates into votes. He shunned the debates, which so far has worked for him. It's made the debates kind of a sideshow. But the risk in that, if he doesn't do as well in Iowa and then New Hampshire, the risk is he plays catch up and he pays for it later. So it's a mistake to say it's over before one vote has been cast.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's no doubt, by the way, he does have a lot going for him. Obviously, he's got no problem with name recognition, former president and all. He's got going for him the natural comparison of Biden and that old phrase that politicians love to put to voters, are you better off now than you were before? And, Trump does have a proven track record in the mind of some voters of being better on inflation or gas prices, the border. He's also got those federal and state indictments helping him. And then I think it makes a lot of voters feel as though there is an obligation to stand with him as a target of a left-wing assault. And yet, Kate, here's something that strikes me. Even Donald Trump looks a little nervous, which I think is notable. He's up this week with his first ad against Nikki Haley in New Hampshire.
Record numbers streaming across our border, costing taxpayers billions, and almost as many Americans killed from fentanyl as killed in World War II. Yet Haley and Biden oppose Trump's border wall, confirm warnings of terrorists sneaking in through our southern border. Yet Haley joined Biden in opposing Trump's visitor ban from terrorist nations. Haley's weakness puts us in grave danger. Trump's strength protects us.
So, Katie, he's chosen the border, obviously a hot button topic. But what does it say that Trump, with his double-digit lead, feels a need to launch this attack? And what about the attack itself? Fair? Wrong?
I think what Haley had to say about it was pretty incisive and accurate, which is that a few days ago, he was denying that she was surging at all in the polls, and now he's running an attack ad against her. So I think it does suggest that he's concerned that she's become the candidate to beat and that DeSantis has faded a little bit relative to him. I don't think the subject matter is going to be particularly resonant. I do think a lot of single issue voters who on the border who really care about that are already supporting Trump and maybe less likely to support Haley. But she has been pretty hawkish on the border as well. I don't think that particular issue has much resonance on her. So I don't know how effective it will be, especially in some of these early primary states. But it does signify, I think, that she continues to be the candidate to beat over the past few weeks. Paul Ryan called her a growth stock. I think that's the accurate term. And I think that's what the attack ad is really showing.
Yeah, one other question I have about Trump is I think you have to acknowledge that he's gotten a little bit of a pass from his opponents. They have seemed largely reluctant to really go after him. Now, they have a bit. Just last night at a televised town hall, back to back, both DeSantis and Haley took some swipes. DeSantis is saying that Trump doesn't follow through on promises he's made in the past. Haley has both pushed back hard on his attack ad and some other attacks, but she's also making the case that he's a bit of drama. He causes problem for himself. Let's listen to one voter at a town hall ask DeSantis about whether or not he's going soft on Trump.
Why haven't you gone directly after? Polls are down.
What do you mean by going directly after?
In my viewpoint, you're going pretty soft on it.
But what do you think? So, because I've articulated all the differences time and time again on the campaign trail. I know. I think that there's just a narrative I think the narrative is this. I think what the media wants is they want Republican candidates to just kind of like smear him personally and kind of do that. That's just not how I roll.
What do you make of that, Bill? How much do you think it has helped Trump that some of the candidates really have seemed unwilling to directly go after him on some of the things that, even policy issues and policy differences? Obviously, I can understand their reluctance to attack him on anything that the left is attacking him on. But I guess it's a tricky situation. But how much do you think this approach has helped Trump and will continue to help Trump as this race goes on?
Well, I look at it as two things. Trump decided not to participate in debates. And by doing that, he made them kind of a sort of sideshow. Who's going to be the number two guy? And so he kind of diminished the importance of all these people running against him. But I don't think Donald Trump would be able to have got away with it without the active assistance of all those Democrats who indicted him and fed his popularity. That really insulated him from paying any price. Look, I think DeSantis is half right. The press, like Joe Biden, wants Donald Trump to win the nomination. That's why the most dangerous place for a Republican candidate is to be number two behind Trump. First, there was DeSantis, and then Haley getting attacked by all quarters. They really want Trump as the GOP nominee. Now, to be clear, they want to weaken Trump, but they think this will make for a more exciting campaign for the press to cover with Donald Trump, but they want him to lose, too. So anytime anyone other than Mr. Trump gets close to the nomination, I think they're going to go on attack.
No, that's a really great point, Bill. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to delve in a little bit to the DeSantis campaign in general and whether he might have an expectations problem at the moment. Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel here with Bill McGurn and Kate Batchelder Odell. We're getting to the stage in this primary race where everyone begins to engage in what they call the expectations game. And it strikes me that the stakes are biggest in that department right now for Ron DeSantis. He launched on the back of his hugely successful reelection in Florida last year. He was supposed to roll over any competition to take on Trump. And he really early on set his sights on Iowa, claiming he'd win the state. And then did what people like to call the full Chuck Grassley, visiting all 99 Iowa counties. And yet here he is essentially tied with Haley and quite far behind Trump. Kate, what are the stakes for DeSantis in Iowa? Is this a make or break moment for him? And what's he doing to kind of cap his campaign as he goes into the caucuses?
I do think this is a make or break moment for him because he has really focused his resources in Iowa and isn't competing as hard in New Hampshire, where Nikki Haley is poised to do much better. And it really is brutal from his perspective to see how much ground Nikki Haley has gained on him in recent weeks, even in Iowa, where he's gotten the governor's endorsement. Kim Reynolds doesn't seem to be moving the needle as much. Also, you had the fact that the Americans for Prosperity Network threw their very large ground game behind Haley several weeks ago. And so that may be contributing to her bump in Iowa. So I do think this is maybe Ron DeSantis' last stand, and he needs to come in second if he wants to continue in the race. Whereas Haley could, I think her theory is that she can come in third and continue on. Though if she comes in second in Iowa, I think it becomes pretty clear she's the alternative candidate to Trump. DeSantis, I thought in his town hall, again, it was great to see both DeSantis and Haley start to really focus more on Trump, who they're competing against. And I have sympathy for what Bill's describing, which is that they need to persuade Trump's voters and not just routinely insult those voters. And so they're trying to pick their spots. You did see, DeSantis come up with a couple ideas in his town hall in Iowa this week, one of which he was talking about a flat tax. I really would have liked to see DeSantis run on an American economic revival platform a lot sooner in his campaign. Now that it's almost over, we're getting into some really core issues like taxes. The flat tax itself is more of a political idea than a reality, given that a lot of folks don't pay income taxes anymore. So practically speaking, you're not going to raise taxes on huge segments of society. But it was the start of a conversation, I think, about something important that does give me pause about whether his candidacy might have been different had he staked it out on some of those, like I said, economic revival issues. But I do think, like I said, this is his last opening to really make an impression, or I think he'll have a hard time in the later states breaking through.
Totally agree with that. I would note, too, that I think there's an expectations issue potentially for Donald Trump as well, which is a downside of having polled so far ahead of everybody for so long and at that 50% level in Iowa, meaning, if one of those candidates, either DeSantis or Haley, puts a dent in that, takes voters away from him, and he rolls out of Iowa, he might win, but suddenly at 40%, 41%, does that end up making him look weaker going into New Hampshire? So there's a lot at stake here. I'm really fascinated, Bill, by Kate's point that possibly DeSantis's campaign would look better maybe if he'd engaged on some of this earlier, because it's really striking given the attention that was on him. His campaign, and just in the last month, it's had some structural problems. It's had more difficulty fundraising, some staff changes. And he seems to have struggled a bit to take off with the voter imagination. What do you think accounts for that? Why isn't he fulfilled the sort of promise, as it were, that was originally his campaign?
First of all, I think he had an excellent record as governor, economic growth and everything. He is very successful, his impressive resume. But I think the thing that hurt DeSantis was in the debates. When he's defending his record in Florida or going up against Gavin Newsom, a blue state argument, he's really good. No one can touch him. The problem is when he's been asked about things that he thinks Trump voters would care about or might hold against him, he's equivocated. For example, in one of the debates, he was asked whether Mike Pence did the right thing on January 6th. Instead of saying yes and then getting on with it, he equivocated, and the moderator had to ask him 3 times. Another thing on Ukraine, he was asked for his position, and he tried to split the difference, saying Germany needs to give more money. That's not leadership. And I think he would have had a good argument. By contrast, Nikki Haley was very forthright in those answers and didn't equivocate. I think that's what accounts for her nipping up on DeSantis' heels and in some cases taking over.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been saying for months, free Ron DeSantis. Will the real Ron DeSantis step up? Kate, Bill mentioned the debates. We've got a final one before the Iowa caucuses coming up on CNN. The only qualifiers this time were Trump, DeSantis, and Haley. But Trump is skipping it again. He's instead going to do an event on Fox. So we're going to have a mano a mano between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. I think that's going to be interesting and clarifying. But what does DeSantis need to do in that debate?
Well, one thing I think is interesting is that now that you're down to 2 candidates on the stage, does it change the dynamics that Trump doesn't show up? I think it could potentially, though he hasn't paid a political price so far for not coming. And at the same time, that's because many of these debates have been, 9-way yelling contests that don't look like anybody's going to break through. With just Haley and DeSantis, it could be a different picture. It could also be a different picture if they continue what they seem to have started doing, which is a change in strategy, which is to really go after Trump more than they have. Some of the debates that have been larger, you've really seen Haley and DeSantis go after each other pretty hard. And some of the issues they've decided to choose, I think, have been quite silly, such as who attracted more Chinese investment to their home state. I mean, this is very unhelpful, especially since both of them fundamentally agree on China. So that makes it even less productive. But what does DeSantis need to do to regain the momentum? I mean, I think free Ron DeSantis, I'm struggling to come up with a better idea. I mean, I think he needs to define himself with some kind of overarching message about what the America he wants to see is like. And that's why I mentioned the tax issue, because I do think economic revival is such a potent theme amid inflation and living standards, high mortgage rates. That's a core issue that the public cares about. And we haven't really seen him stake out, for instance, a target for America to get back to 3% growth. That sounds abstract, but it has huge, huge implications for how well Americans are living. So that, I think, would be one area that I'd encourage him to focus on, is develop a really substantive core economic message that can kind of distinguish himself from Trump. But of course, Kim, I mean, one reality here is that it may be too late for that. It is hard at this late hour to come up with a new reboot of the campaign. So I don't know if that's possible at this juncture, but I think that's the only path to doing it. And I think one of the reasons Haley is doing well is because she's showing conviction and some theory of the case of the country that is different from Trump and is cogent.
Yep. Well, maybe too late, maybe not. I always like to think that, it only takes a voter a millisecond to change their mind. So who knows? We'll see. But we will have that shot this week when this debate gets teed up.